it is Super Bowl Sunday, which is a very, very big deal at work because, as you might well know, the game is going to be on Fox. So a lot of what we have been doing at Fox has been geared around the Super Bowl, and it is a historic Super Bowl. It's always a holiday, but it's particularly interesting and worthwhile to point out that it is also a Black holiday because this is Black History Month, and there is history going to be made in the Super Bowl related to Black quarterbacks. So this is also me just kind of putting down the wall for you in a second here. I came into this as a writer. I think that I'm good at speaking out loud because I'm really good at putting down my thoughts, right? And then I can tell you what I think. And frankly, I sit in front of you with a microphone and or on whatever screen you're watching because that's where the people are, right? But in so doing, I read a ton and I was made aware of just what it meant for a Black man to play quarterback in the NFL at a very, very early age. My father's first reveal to me was Randall Cunningham, the ultimate weapon, and just what that meant. And then understanding why it was that Randall Cunningham was talked about in a way that, frankly, others were not, say like Brett Favre, for instance. And I say that to lead you into this. Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts are going to be the first pair of starting quarterbacks who are Black to start in the Super Bowl. This is a game they've been playing for 57 years, and pro football has been around for over 100. But the journey to this moment has been arduous and it has been long and it is worth discussing. So what I'm going to lay out for you first are some facts. Facts, no opinion. I will let you know when I get to my opinion on this, but I need you to know these facts to underscore just how important Sunday will be for me, for Black folks, and for the sport that is pro football, the National Football League. So it's not just that Patrick Mahomes is the youngest player ever to win NFL MVP or Super Bowl MVP. He was 24 when he did that. It's that he is a Black quarterback that did that. And it does matter because they weren't always Black quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson is also one of just 2 players ever to win unanimous MVP honors. He did this in only his second year in the league. The only other guy to do that is Tom Brady. He did this in 2010. Year 10 for him in the league. It's a very big deal. But even as Lamar Jackson was going through the NFL draft process, we had really good NFL evaluators, namely Bill Polian, saying, I don't think he should be playing quarterback. The Ravens had to trade up to go get him in the first round, and he's turned out to be that dude. Patrick Mahomes famously fell in that 2017 draft, and Andy Reid said, I think I see something there, and he went to go get him. But Andy Reid was also the first person to identify that not just that Donovan McNabb was good, but that Mike Vick could come out of prison and still hit you for 6 tutties and 300 yards through the air as a starting quarterback in the NFL. Now, before Lamar Jackson, before Patrick Mahomes, and certainly before me, Doug Williams, Randall Cunningham, Steve McNair, Donovan McNabb, Mike Vick, those are the guys. But Warren Moon is the only Black quarterback ever to make it into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He did that in 2006. That's my senior year of high school. He's still the only Black quarterback in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. A little bit more about him in a minute, but James Jack Harris was the first Black quarterback to start a season opener in the NFL. That's 1969. That's 15 years after the Supreme Court overturned Brown v. Board of Education, which is, separate but equal. And 50 years, after the NFL was founded, and a year before the NFL and AFL merger. So 50 years after that, after 1969, we get, those 4 out of 8 teams in the NFL playoffs featuring a Black starting quarterback, which was a pivotal year. You've heard many people in the know explain that 2019 was the year of the Black quarterback because there were so many and they were all so very good. Like I can get to perhaps number 6 on the list before I start talking about Dak Prescott, and Dak Prescott legitimately is a great NFL quarterback. But between 1933 and 1945, there were no Black players in the NFL. You might call it a ban, you might call it a color barrier, whatever you want to call it. They did not employ Black folks to play football in the National Football League from 1931 to 1945. Before that, we got to go back to 1927 when Duke Slater, whose name is on the field at Iowa, was the last Black player to play in the NFL, right? And before that, the first Black quarterback and frankly, Black football player of note in the National Football League is Fritz Pollard. But we don't talk about him as being a quarterback, A, because he was inducted into the Hall of Fame as a running back, but because the game is just different. And it's been different basically since World War II. And then you got to take a leap forward before you get to Willie Thrower in October 8th, 1953, coming in relief of George Blanda as Chicago Bears quarterback, as being the first black quarterback to play in what we know as the modern era of professional football. Willie Thrower was also an outstanding player out of Pennsylvania. He had offers from everybody until they found out he was black. Georgia, Miami, all turned him down when they found out he was black. Only Michigan State kept their word about offering a scholarship. And I'll never forget this because I read this note, and coach at the time, who preceded Duffy Daughtry, said, you know, I don't see a black quarterback or any sort of colored quarterback. I see somebody who can throw the ball 60 yards through the air, which is 59 yards farther than anybody else can throw in this room, which I really love, because to say that in 1952 on a national championship Michigan State team is a very big deal. And it also underscores what I'm going to repeat to you, which is in each one of these instances, it has taken usually a white man to go to bat for a black man just to get an opportunity. That's been true in my life. It's certainly true in the lives of these quarterbacks that I'm going to talk with you about. But Willie Thrower is the first one of those guys that we had to mention and talk about. But also, just since we're in college for a second here, I want to add that Wisconsin had its first black quarterback in the Big Ten and was the first to field a black quarterback in the Big Ten in 1956. His name is Sidney Williams Jr. You also had Sandy Stevenson, who played quarterback at Minnesota, led them to a Rose Bowl berth and a national championship in 1960. Jimmy Ray II famously led perhaps the first integrated team to win a predominantly white institution, predominantly white institution national championship with a black quarterback. And I mention that because Jimmy Ray never got an opportunity to play quarterback in the NFL, even as he was outstanding at Michigan State. You also got to keep going and look at Chuck Ely, who I've spoken about on the show, who I wrote about at Fox Sports, who finished his entire career, 3 years at Toledo, undefeated, and only last year got inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. He never got an opportunity to play quarterback in the NFL. He had to go to the CFL, like many other black quarterbacks, and frankly, other quarterbacks, to get an opportunity to play the position that he'd been playing for most of his life. The SEC didn't field a black quarterback until 1972, when Tennessee tapped, I kid you not, Condredge Holloway. And that was 5 years after Nate Northington integrated the SEC at Kentucky, and he paid a dear price for it in 1967. The first black quarterback was not even selected in the number one overall until 2001, and was Mike Vick, and nobody could deny that Mike Vick was the moment. And to play Madden is to play with Mike Vick. That is how he became who he is to many of us. And there are so many guys that I would play against for which you just weren't allowed to pick Vic or the Falcons because he was that much of a cheat code in the game. So we get to the first black MVP not long after that, Steve McNair, 2003. And then, of course, I mentioned, just what the Hall of Fame has done, but Tony Dungy also has had so much to say about this, and he's felt so good at what iteration we've seen. Because Tony Dungy played quarterback at Minnesota. He was good. Team MVP there. When he got drafted, he didn't. The NFL draft came and went. He didn't go. He wanted to play quarterback. They said, we're not going to draft you at quarterback. He signed as an undrafted free agent with the Pittsburgh Steelers, played safety there. But he did see a guy named Joe Gilliam Jr. show up. Now, Joe Gilliam Jr. played quarterback at Tennessee State, followed Eldridge Dickey, who also was pretty doggone good at Tennessee State, whom I've written about at Fox Sports. And Joe Gilliam Jr. started ahead of Terry Bradshaw when he was at Pittsburgh, 1978. Went 4-1-1 and then got the hook from Chuck Noll. Not because he was bad, but it's like Lincoln Riley pulling Spencer Rattler in 2021 for Caleb Williams. Terry Bradshaw was just the better guy for the moment, but it broke Joe Gilliam Jr. Even as he won 2 Super Bowls as a backup quarterback, he ended up pawning both of his Super Bowl rings and fell into drug addiction. He passed away about 20 years ago. It's not unlike the story of Marlon Briscoe, who became the first black quarterback to, play for the Denver Broncos, right? Along with the Buffalo Bills there for a little while, but never really got the opportunity to just keep the job and was moved back to wide receiver by Lou Saban. Got traded to Miami, where he was wide receiver on one side. Paul Warfield was the wide receiver on the other. And They won 2 Super Bowls with the Miami Dolphins, including that 72 undefeated team. But Marlon Briscoe fell into a deep depression, picked up a drug addiction, and also ended up pawning both of his Super Bowl rings. These stories are terribly important. And this is where we get to my opinion. I'm not telling you these tragic stories and heaping on this trauma for the sake of the struggle, because Lord knows that I know all too well about the struggle. I wrote a book that is about the Tulsa Race Massacre because these things matter so much to me. I realize that a lot of my appeal in this space, and frankly to anybody that speaks to me, is my passion for things and how emotional I can sometimes be about what I believe and why I believe it. It kind of shrouds, I think sometimes, I went to school for this stuff, to be an English professor, to teach writing, to teach literature and history. But that also spurs from a moment in which my grandmother was my biggest champion growing up. My grandmother is civil rights royalty. She sued the state of Mississippi for voting rights reapportionment, and she won, and she also paid a dear price for it. She was blackballed out of her business, a Black woman who owned her own beauty salon. Nobody wanted to patronize her because they feared what might happen to them if they supported my grandmother, who just stood up for Black folks in their right to vote. That is the struggle. That is trauma. I say that to tell you it's important that we recognize these moments when they happen and that we find joy in them. Like, that's what's so cool about this moment that is going to happen on Sunday, because when Doug Williams became the first Black quarterback to win a Super Bowl in 1987, it was a marked achievement. It's on par with Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier. It's that big a deal. And another white man had to say, I need Doug to have this. Matter of fact, Joe Gibbs was a running backs coach at Tampa when Doug Williams was first selected by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to be quarterback the first round. Didn't really get the job, but he was getting berated by his quarterbacks coach, just up and down. MF this, MF that. Joe Gibbs would sprint down the sideline to tell his quarterbacks coach, if you yell at him again, I'm going to fight you, because he's a rookie and he's learning like everybody else. Stop yelling at him. Years later, my man, Doug Williams, even went to the USFL to play for the Oklahoma Outlaws, which were once in Tulsa, Oklahoma, eventually moved out of Arizona and so forth, so on. Came back to play for the Washington football team when Joe Gibbs was head coach. Now, at the time, Jay Schroeder was the guy, and he was pretty much cemented as the guy, and Doug Williams wanted to be a starting quarterback, and he was getting ready to get traded to what was then the Oakland Raiders. And Joe had made the trade. He told Doug that he was going to go, and at the 11th hour, he changed his mind, and he was smiling about it. Doug Williams was not happy about it. He's a Grambling State legend, all right? He finished 4th in the Heisman Trophy voting in 1978, okay? He wanted to be a starting quarterback, and he'd earned that. So going into the 86 playoffs, Joe Gibbs made a move. He just decided that Jay Schroeder wasn't good enough for them to go where they wanted to go, and that he needed to throw Doug Williams into the fire. And they rode Doug Williams through to the 1987 Super Bowl, where he put together one of the greatest performances in a single quarter ever by anybody. He had 300 yards passing and 4 TDs in the second quarter in a 42-10 destruction of John Elway's Denver Broncos. He ended that game with 340 yards through the air, 4 TDs and a pick. Outstanding. And that in and of itself put to bed whether or not a Black man could lead a team to a championship, because he just done it. And for him to come out of an HBCU was even bigger. Now, he has since become an outstanding coach in his own right at Grambling and went to go work for the Washington football team as a senior advisor and scout. But what he will be forever is that moment. And that happened when I was born. I wasn't around for it. I was born in 87. That game was played in January of 87. And now, 36 years later, I'm doing this job as a full-grown adult. And we are still witnessing Black history in Black History Month. And each time that it happens, I make a point to celebrate it, because this is what the struggle is about. It's for Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts being able to play against each other. And for me to know that, one, I ain't had a team in the Super Bowl since, the late 90s and hadn't had a team make a championship game, Dallas Cowboys. in the 21st century. So I can't lose either way, but I sincerely am going to win on Sunday. And we're going to win on Sunday because this is yet another milestone that we get to overcome that is right on time, quite honestly. I mean, Beyonce became the most decorated Grammy Award winner of all time last Sunday. Viola Davis finished her EGOT. There are only 18 people in history who have won an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony, and she got there on Sunday. Yours truly is up against her for the best book in the nonfiction literary category by the NAACP Image Awards, and I'm not going to be mad if I lose to the GOAT, okay? We're also at a moment where we're going to see the first Black woman be an assistant coach in a Super Bowl. Autumn Lockwood is a strength and conditioning coach for the Philadelphia Eagles, and Tulsa native, Booker T. Washington alumna, Nicole Lynn represents Jalen Hurts, which means she is the first Black woman to represent a starting quarterback in the Super Bowl. Shout out to her husband, Gabe, for I stayed in the same apartment complex, went to school, get my master's with him as she was in law school in Norman at the same time. And it's just been so much fun to see their journey together. And homegirl is running Clutch Sports' football operation now. These moments don't happen as often as I would want them to. They certainly don't happen in, well, let's call it an avenue in which I operate, which is football. So when they do happen and we get first, I'm going to acknowledge it. I hope you will too. But we should also acknowledge it's going to be so much fun to see two Big 12 quarterbacks in the Super Bowl, knowing that the Big 12 will have its second Super Bowl, right? 4 years. All because, yeah, a couple of Black quarterbacks earned their way to that spot. Thank you for watching the #1 college football show. Please remember to subscribe to the channel and like this video so that you don't miss any of the best college football coverage in America. Thank you for watching the #1 college football show. Please remember to subscribe to the channel and like this video so that you don't miss any of the best college football coverage in America.